Welcome everyone, to honorable guests, family members, friends, and community members. Welcome to the Soil Collection Ceremony, a solemn event to honor the memory of Alfred Williams and Plummer Bullock. These two innocent men were brutally lynched in Warren County, North Carolina, a little over 100 years ago. As we stand on this ground, where the unspeakable hatred and injustice prevailed a century ago, we are reminded of the dark past chapters of our nation's history, chapters marked by racial terror and the denial of human dignity and human rights. Alfred Williams and Plummer Bullock were pillars of their community. However, their lives were stolen from them in a senseless act of violence that shattered the lives of their families and left an enduring scar on Warren County. Their lynchings was a crime not only against them, but against humanity itself. It was manifestation of the systemic racism of white supremacy that gripped the South and much of the nation at that time. For decades, the name of Alfred Williams and Plummer Bullock were shrouded by silence. Their story was buried beneath layers of fear of complicity. But today, we refuse to let their memory fade into obscurity. Through the efforts of the Warren County NAACP Community Remembrance Coalition, we have come together to reclaim their history, to acknowledge the pain of the past, and to work toward a more just and equitable future. The soil collection ceremony is a powerful act of remembrance and reconciliation. By gathering soil from this site, where Alfred Williams and Plummer Bullock were last imprisoned before being lynched, we are symbolically bringing their story to light and to acknowledge the wounds that have yet to heal. As we place this soil into the jars, let us reconfirm our commitment to fighting racism and injustice in all shapes and forms. Let us vow to create a society where all people, regardless of their race, are treated with dignity and respect. To the families of Alfred Williams and Plummer Bullock, we extend our deepest sympathies and our unwavering support. We know that your wounds are still fresh, and we honor your courage and resilience. May the memories of Alfred Williams and Plummer Bullock serve as a constant reminder of the fragility of human life and the importance of protecting the rights of all peoples. Let us this day reflect on the past, to learn from our mistakes, and to build a better future for all. Thank you. I will now introduce our MC of the hours, because I know y'all waiting for me to get out the way. If you're not, hey. Our MC for today is the Honorable North Carolina Representative-elect Rodney Pierce. He is an educator, research historian, and author. He was married in 2019, North Carolina. In 2019, North Carolina, he was the Council for Human Studies. Okay, Rodney, I got some all mixed up here. Let me start over again. Okay, he was married 2019. North Carolina Council. This is what happened when you send me emails and don't put the period for me to stop, comma for me to slow down, and so forth. I just keep going. So y'all bear with me for a minute. I might even let you read your. Yeah, come on, save me the embarrassment.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about myself. First of all, to God be the glory. And I want to make sure that I do proper protocol and acknowledge other elected officials who are present. I know Sheriff Branch is back there. Glad to have you with us today, sir. Any members of the clergy who may be present as well, especially the descendants of the two men that we are in remembrance for today. I personally want to thank the Warren County chapter of the NAACP as well as the Community Remembrance Coalition for giving me the honor of emceeing this program on today, as well as the voters of Warren County for giving me the honor of being your next North Carolina State House representative. Thank you very much. I'm going to go through this real quick. I'm an educator, a research historian, and author. In 2019, I was named the North Carolina Council for the Social Studies Teacher of the Year. And in 2022, the North Carolina Central University Marathon Teaching Institute named me one of its African American Male Teachers of the Year. I'm a fellow of the Center for Racial Equity in Education, Carolina Public Humanities, and the Public School Forum of North Carolina. I've worked as a consultant with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, the North Carolina Museum of History, the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission, and PBS North Carolina. Last month, with your support, I was elected to the North Carolina State House of Representatives to represent Halifax, Northampton, and Warren counties in House District 27. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated and a proud father of 3 children. All right, now that we got that out the way. I want to share a few quotes with you real quick, and I promise I won't be up here a long time, but I thought these were fitting. You know, there's a gentleman named James Baldwin. We're all familiar with James Baldwin? Yes. African-American writer and social critic. Yes. Now, when I was teaching in Nash County, I got in trouble for sharing this quote from James Baldwin, and I got accused of teaching critical race theory, so that stuff was real, y'all, when they were talking about it a few years ago. The quote is, "American history is longer, larger, more various, more beautiful, and more terrible than anything anyone has ever said about it." The other quote I want to share from Mr. Baldwin is, "The great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us, are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and history is literally present in all that we do." And the last quote I want to share with you is from a gentleman named Arthur Schlesinger Jr. He was a historian in the White House during the Kennedy administration. His quote is, "Honest history is the weapon of freedom." And I think what Mr. Baldwin said, what Mr. Schlesinger said, kind of encapsulates what we're doing today. We are confronting the history of Warren County, history of North Carolina, history of the United States. We're going to confront it honestly, and we're going to use it as a tool of liberation. Not just to emancipate our minds or our souls, but to emancipate, not just to emancipate us in a physical sense, but also spiritually as well as mentally. And I just wanted to set the tone with those quotes. Now, moving forward in our program, we'll have music provided by Mr. Felix Green's African Music, Chants, and Libations. Following that, we will have Telling the Story by Dr. Glenn Henson, professor and historian from UNC Chapel Hill, and Mrs. Jerry Ann K. Johnson, Warren County Visionary. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Felix Green. I'm going to do the libation. And then we'll play some music. I don't like to have this portion of the ceremony interrupted by anything. When I was a little boy, we used to have to ask our parents for permission to continue a thing. I'm looking out here and I see some very prominent elders, and I would like for your permission to continue. Thank you. The first libation I'm going to pour is for Mr. Alfred Williams and Mr. Plummer Bullock. I see a little life right there. We pour life, which is water. This looks like a wine bottle, but it's just water. Okay. And we pour life onto life. So my first libation is for Mr. Alfred Williams, Mr. Plummer Bullock, and the ones who have gone before us in the past. And the people say, Ashe. All right. The second libation I'm going to pour is for those of us who are present now that stands on the ones who came before us in their power, in their strength. We move forward. And the people say, Ashe. Thank you. The last libation I'm going to pour is for the generations that are yet to come. Our future. We, here present today, are responsible for everything that they should know. We stand proud, we stand strong, committed to doing what's right for us and our people. And the people say, Ashe. Thank you. That ends the libation. I think I'll play a little drum over here.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much, Felix and the drummers, for that ceremony. Glenn, you want to join me?
I will.
Before slavery's end, Warren County was known as one of the richest counties in the state of North Carolina. People came here from all around to enjoy the mineral spring retreats and hotels. They came here to enroll in the many schools for advanced education. Warren County was also a place where white supremacy reigned. Many of its outstanding citizens, they led the movement to disenfranchise black voters in 1900. 1921, 58 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, black people, they didn't have the chains of slavery on them. They began to feel their strength, and they had it going on. There was a spirit of progressiveness in the black community. There was an unquenchable thirst for education and religious life. Remember, the first Freedom School was in the basement of Oak Chapel AME Church. Shiloh Institute was established here in Warrenton in 1870, right around the corner on Plummer Street, then called College Street. There was a black school at the Black Episcopal Church, All Saints Episcopal Church. In fact, there were black schools at almost every black church in the communities in Warren County. Also, now remember the Hook and Ladder, John Plummer's Hook and Ladder Fire Company was established not long after the end of the Civil War, 1869. And that was a very necessary organization for its time, being able to put out fires. By 1921, black people had established businesses in the towns of Warrenton and Norlina. There were independent black farmers, professionals, there were teachers, there were businesses, black businesses all throughout the county. And black people were making plans to establish high schools like Warren County Training School and John R. Hawkins High School. By 1921, black people, they had such a deep commitment to improving their communities. By 1921, black people in Warren County embodied resilience.
And it can be said they embodied a spirit of resistance as well. Resistance was probably the key word of so many activities in black communities here in the county, where there were attempts by sharecroppers to hold people to the land, to hold them to unfair agreements, where there were efforts to quash those buildings of schools at every turn. The Shiloh Institute by 1921 had been put out of its home right down the street because white folks in the neighborhood decided it was not appropriate to have a school of higher learning here in the town of Warrenton. Folks at every turn were resisting this kind of supremacist action. One example of that ties in with one of the families that we're celebrating today, the family of Reverend William Bullock and Betsy Burwell Bullock. In 1908, the Reverend's family, one of whose children was Plummer Bullock. He moved his family away from Warren County up to Batavia in upstate New York. He moved them up there because at that time they had 10 children under the age of 15. And he decided that what he wanted for his children was a different kind of education. When that family returned 6 years later back to Warren County, those kids brought with them a different sensibility. They had grown up and been educated in integrated schools in Batavia. They had seen the possibility of black success. And when they moved back here, the very first thing that Reverend Bullock did was co-purchase with another entrepreneur, black entrepreneur, John Edwards, here in Warrenton, a 400-acre farm. 400 acres being purchased in 1915 by a black man. This was the spirit of resistance, and this was the spirit that Plummer Bullock and his brothers and sisters grew up with. Now, we fast forward the story to a January night. A January night in Norlina, where Plummer Bullock and his distant cousin, Alfred Williams, actually it was during the day, it was a Tuesday, they decide to go into J.P. Williams' store. J.P. Williams' store, a grocery store right on the main street of Norlina. They go in to purchase some apples. 10 cents of apples, folks say. There were 2 sets of apples there to choose from. There was a set of apples in a good barrel. Those were unbruised apples. There was a set of apples in a second barrel. Those were bruised. Those were starting to rot. Those were cheaper. Plummer Bullock chose a bag full of the good apples, paid his dime, got the apples in a bag, walked out of the store, and when they left the store, he opened the bag to discover that the 16-year-old white clerk in that store had switched out those apples. And the apples that were in there were in fact bruised and rotting apples. Plummer Bullock, having grown up in Batavia, New York, decides he's going to go back and complain, probably with Mr. Williams saying, who's older, who's 45 years old, Plummer Bullock was 19, probably with Mr. Williams saying, I'm not so sure that's a wise thing to do. But Mr. Bullock walked back to the store, confronted that young white clerk, and said, you either give me my money back, or you give me the apples that I chose from the barrel.
Okay, now imagine, just think back, 1921. Imagine 2 black men walking into a white-owned store, asking a young white clerk for their money back. What do you think happened?
I think the answer to that should be fairly obvious. Immediately, the white clerk started calling names and calling other white men in the store and from outside. Folks gathered quickly. There were threats, there were accusations, and probably at the urging of Alfred Williams and Plummer Bullock decided it was probably wise to leave the store. And so they did. But those white men gathered in the store were not satisfied. They felt, what audacity has come into our town that a young black man would challenge the word of a white storekeeper. The storekeeper, the clerk, by the way, was only 16 years old. What audacity was this? And so there were conversations and there were plans. And there was a decision that somehow those white folks needed to organize and needed to somehow teach a lesson to these folks in the black community, especially these folks that had spent time up north, that this was not appropriate. And so what they decided was that they were going to gather on Saturday night, in the middle of the night, arm themselves, and march into the black neighborhood to shoot it up, rather randomly.
And it did not take long for the black men and the black folk in Color Town over in Norlina to get the message that this was about to happen. They knew that trouble was right around the corner. So the question is, why were these men not afraid to stand up and confront these white people who were about to wanted to take them down? Why weren't they afraid to stand up for their families, for their communities?
Remember that theme of resistance. And remember that Norlina was a railroad town, and many of the black men that worked in that town were not directly responsible to the white local employers. And when they realized what was going to happen, they decided they weren't going to let the children and the families in their communities be struck by random bullets of some white mob. And so what they did, a group of men, including Plummer Bullock, including his brother Matthew Bullock, including Alfred Williams, including a host of their neighbors, and including a number of people that had actually been married by Plummer Bullock's father, Reverend William Bullock. They all gathered together and they said, we're going to go stop this from happening. And so shortly after midnight, that group of men left their community and marched to meet the white mob. Many of them certainly knew that this was a death sentence, or very possibly close to it. So it's night. It's after midnight. There are very few lights in the town, just a few around the train depot. And it was at the train depot that the white mob met, unexpectedly, a group of armed black men. Gunshots broke the night and continued for probably half an hour. By the time that gunfight was over, there were 5 white men on the ground, one of them rather critically injured, who was the brother of that store clerk, and there were 3 black men on the ground. Folks gathered them up, excuse me, quickly moved back home. The white sheriff of Norlina instantly organized a posse. Many of the members of that posse were, not surprisingly, members of the same mob. The posse went into the town indiscriminately, knocking on doors at 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning and pulling men out who they suspected had been at the gunfight. Among those men were James Alfred Williams and Plummer Bullock. They tossed them in cars and they carried them here to this jail.
James Alfred Williams, he lived in Colortown with his wife, Tempe Perry Williams. He was 46 years old. They lived in a rented house right across from the ball field with their 6 children. He had a 23-year-old son who worked as a chauffeur. He had 18 and 16-year-old girls, a 13-year-old boy, and a set of 12-year-old twin girls. He worked sometime as a farmer, but he also had worked for the railroad.
Plummer Bullock, in turn, remembered 19 years old, the son of Reverend William Bullock and Betsy Burwell Bullock, was living with his family at the time in Norlina. They had recently sold that 400-acre farm that they purchased after coming from New York for quite a significant profit, something that certainly did not sit well with many of the white folks in Norlina. They were seen as one of these families that were perhaps a little too big for their britches. And so, when Plummer Bullock was pulled here, he was coming from a family that at the time had 6 children, 6 siblings living in the household, the youngest of whom was only 9 years old and had been born in New York. So this son of this respected religious family who worshiped at Oak Level Church and Alfred Williams, they were carried right here into the jail. And they knew, folks in the community knew, that this story wasn't over yet.
So Percy Adams, he was a school teacher at All Saints Episcopal Church. He organized a group of black men. A lot of the men he organized had been World War I veterans, and they gathered in the basement of Oak Chapel Church.
Down there.
Yes. They could look out of the window and see that a rowdy white mob was organizing themselves out here in front of the jail. So these men were getting themselves ready to protect the jail. Resistance in action. However, Warrenton's mayor was afraid that there would be another gunfight. So he asked the prominent lawyer and Confederate sympathizer Tasker Polk to organize a home guard. And a home guard, these are just people you just kind of pull together and deputize them. So the mayor says to Tasker Polk, take the home guard down to the jail and protect the jail. However, Tasker Polk took his home guard down to Oak Chapel Church, disarmed the black men, and dispersed the crowd.
So what do you think happens next? The crowd, literally in the space in which you are seated now, and surrounding the church. It's night, it's midnight, they have torches for light, and they approach this door, and they bang on the door until they rouse the jailer. Now, Percy Adams had already warned the jailer, Mr. John Green, who himself was black. Percy Adams had already warned him there was going to be trouble. And so he's likely in the back of the sleeping quarters, because this is where he lived, in the front part of the jail. But the men knocked on the door, threatened to force it down, and then when he came to the door, put guns on his head and said, "Give us the key." They took the key, walked around the jail where the entry to the cells are, up the stairs. You have probably 18 men at that point jailed from having been rounded up in Norlina. The crowd chose two, the two that had been there in that store in Norlina. They pulled out Alfred Williams, they pulled out Plummer Bullock, they pulled him down the stairs. They pulled him to a set of waiting cars right here. They took those cars out towards Norlina, and about midway between Norlina and Warrenton, they stopped the cars. They forced the two men out, and in very short order, they shot them again and again and again. They left the bodies there, lying by the side of the road. The crowd, the mob, drove away. The next morning, a coroner's jury came out, but by that time, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of white folks, called them tourists, coming from town in Norlina and here, driving by car, going by ox cart, riding on horse, to go see those bodies. It wasn't until afternoon that the families of Alfred Williams and Plummer Bullock were allowed to recover their bodies.
So what do you think happened to the Bullock family after seeing their son Plummer lying dead, murdered on the side of the road? They hurried up and got out of town. They got out of town, headed for Washington, D.C., and that's where they landed. Matthew Bullock, their other son, somehow made it to Hamilton, right north of the Canadian border in New York, and that's where he stayed.
Meanwhile, that option wasn't available to the widow of Alfred Williams. Tempe Williams with 6 children in the house. Alfred Williams had been the breadwinner. She had been the homekeeper. And suddenly, everything's changed. Tempe Williams ends up getting a job as a cook at the Hotel Norlina. The Hotel Norlina, literally across the street from the J.P. Williams store, and less than 50 feet from where the gunfight happened. While she served for more than 15 years there in that hotel as a cook, there's no doubt that many of the men who were part of that initial mob in the gunfight and who were part of the lynching mob here at the jail came for their dinner right there in the hotel where Tempe Williams ended up cooking. When Tempe Williams' children grew old enough, they too left Warren County, almost all of those children quickly departed, heading up to Pennsylvania and New Jersey, leaving Warren County far behind.
So now it's 2024, and we stand here in front of this jail. The lynching of Alfred Williams and Plummer Bullock, that history still haunts us today. History is never just the past. It is always the present and the future. We stand here today with hope for healing. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
You can take that mic and hold it.
Okay.
So you can get better.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Let me hold this. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson and Dr. Henson, for that incredibly moving narrative of what happened to those two young men. I'm here to introduce a family member of the Williams and Bullock family and our keynote speaker for this afternoon, Dr. Arnett Coleman. Dr. Coleman was born and raised in North Carolina. We were talking earlier, and his education started in North, where he would walk to school every day to a 3-room building known as the North Colored School. And he said he had some of the best teachers he'd ever had in his life. This man has a doctorate, okay? And he's saying that the best education, correct me if I'm wrong, doctor, that he received was in this little 3-room building that was segregated. So that should give you some semblance of, you know, the degree and the expertise of the educators we had and still have. I like to think I'm one of them. He transitioned to Wise, North Carolina, to what became the North Warren High School. He got a bachelor's degree in biology from Livingston College, an historically black college in Salisbury, North Carolina. Attended medical school at Duke University. Did his internship and completed his residency at the University of Pittsburgh. Returned to Durham afterwards and initially worked at the Lincoln Community Center before he opened his own medical practice in Durham. That was followed by clinical practice on faculty at Duke University. And I gotta say this. You know what the Supreme Court did a few months ago, right? With the affirmative action decision. And I'm sitting here looking at Dr. Coleman, someone who got a college education from Duke and worked at Duke. And I'm saying to myself, is that decision going to hinder future Dr. Colemans? You know what I mean? So let's think about that as well. Now, he's enjoying retirement. He's married to the former Ruth Reed. They have 2 children, a daughter-in-law, 3 grandchildren. And now most of his time is spent with church, community service, his grandchildren, and tennis. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Arnett Coleman.
Thank you. I really appreciate the fact that we are continuing to do what we're doing here. And as someone stated earlier, it is so important that we don't lose track of our history. Our history builds us to where we are, where we're going to be going. So, I am here today to represent my family, Williams, Bullocks, and actually the Hunters also, but the Williams and the Bullocks. And it was only until recently that I found out that the Williams and Bullocks were cousins, which I'm happy to find out. I actually didn't know this, so one of the problems that we had when I was growing up is the fact that nobody wanted to talk about what happened in North Carolina. And I was always in my grandmother's face to try to get some answers, and she wouldn't. And after hearing some of the dialogue, learning some things that I had not been aware of before, I can understand it. My Aunt Ella had actually told her children that she was in the house when the people came over to extract those people who they thought were involved in the action of with the apples. And being in the house, and no doubt my grandmother was there as well as my aunt and other members of the family, that causes quite a trauma that you never quite get over. And so it explains to me a lot about why I didn't get some of the answers that I was asking for. Because they just wanted to put that aside and not talk about it. But I want to talk about one of the people in our family now who purposely tries to make sure that this history doesn't get lost. And I'm not going to overdo this, but my cousin Maceo Sloan, who's out here in the audience. Now Maceo, actually, Maceo, stand up. Let folks see you. This is Pastor Maceo Sloan. Maceo Sloan, I'm sorry. I have a friend named Maceo Sloan. Maceo Freeman. Maceo is responsible for getting our family reunions together and making sure that that history stays in our minds, that we know what's going on. And he's always here for these events. I also, this is going to be my last one, want to introduce Tina. Tina, would you stand? Tina is a direct descendant. She's a direct descendant of Alfred Williams. Now, are there any direct descendants of Plummer Bullock in the house? Introduce yourself, please.
My name is Carolyn Cheek, and I'm a direct descendant of Matthew Bullock and Plummer Bullock.
Okay.
And I'm Jean Bullock Stevenson from the Manton Oak Level area, and I think probably we're all direct descendants.
Oh yeah, well, you know, great, and it's great. And I'm grateful to be here with my cousins and with my family. There's a recurrent theme in what I'm going to be talking about today, and I'm going to purposely not hold you very long. But the recurrent theme that is going to occur over and over again as I go through this is love, peace, empathy, and not blindly following the crowd. And this begs the question, what's the significance of this with all that we're doing? This may be about the fourth or fifth type of event along this line, but I would venture to say that the reason why we need to do this is because we're human. Humans have certain tendencies, and one of those tendencies is we keep wanting to do the same things over and over again. And when we're talking about human behavior, we have to keep in mind that if we aren't careful, it's easy to be dismissive. It's easy to deny what happened. And when you start denying what happened in the past, you start losing the past. You start losing the significance of what happened in the past. And that's why we need to keep doing what we're doing. As I said, humans tend to do things over and over again. And as long as the conditions of what they're doing doesn't seem to cause any harm to them, or harm to their family, or harm to whatever they think is important, our brain then will say, okay, you don't need to change that. Keep doing it. And it becomes extremely important that we actually understand what we're doing, why it's being done, and actually learn from the past, exploring the history of what has been done, so that we can change our culture and we can move things to a more positive state. The point is, you will not generally make a change in what you're doing if you don't know the harm that it has done to yourself and to others. So those who tell you that you don't need to know your history, and you hear this all the time, you don't need to know your history, or they try to refuse your history being taught, as we had stated before. What they're trying to do is to keep you doing that same thing over and over again, not incorporating love and peace and empathy. It is very important to be willing to learn how to empathize. Be willing to communicate. Communicate with your friends, communicate with your family, but you have to be a little careful. Now, this part is, you have to be a little careful about just communicating with your friends and your family. Because remember, the friends and family may be a part of that herd, that group, that tribe that you're in, that is keeping you from being able to elicit the love and peace and empathy that we need to display. But you need to talk to people who are different than you, people who think differently, people who kind of give you that gut feeling that, oh, I don't really want to bother with them. But sometimes you need to know what they think, and they need to know what you think, so that you can get at the root of the common things that you have, the kinds of dialogue that you can have that can bring about change. Because otherwise you're going to find yourself staying on what we call the bandwagon. And there's a phenomena in psychology known as the bandwagon effect, bandwagon phenomena. And what happens with that is that people who will tend to do the same thing over and over again, as long as their crowd, the people that they are around, they keep doing it because they consider that as being normal. It does not have to be the case. Now, some bandwagons can be good. So if you're going to try to decide, well, what's a good bandwagon and what's not a good bandwagon, just think about what it incorporates. If the bandwagon does incorporate love and peace and harmony and try to bring about change that's positive, that's a good bandwagon. But many times that's not the case. And in a social environment where peace is essential to a harmonious existence, then the bandwagon effect always needs to be analyzed. Every major religion has a component of love and peace. Every single major religion that I've found, and I could speak with the ministers out here and they could prove me wrong if they want, but everyone that I've looked into has peace and love as a basis for that religion. And the type of love, now, you know, there are different types of love. And I'm not going to get into all of that because I don't have enough time. But the type of love I'm talking about is love for your fellow man. The type of love that you know can bring about harmony if you just take a step back and take a look at what you're doing. So that's when you ask yourself, Is it right for me to judge? Is it right to make a decision relative to someone just because of the pigment in their skin or because of the lack of pigment in their skin? It goes both ways. We all need to look at how we judge people. And you have to ask yourself, should you diminish someone simply because of their gender, because of their sexuality, because they're short, because they're tall? We tend to be way too judgmental. And I can tell you for a fact, I've practiced medicine for close to 50 years now. So a long time. I have not found a single person who is perfect. Nobody out here is perfect. So be careful when you start throwing stones. You might break up your own house. There's one sad aspect of human life, and that is the absence of empathy. And I just want to comment briefly on what I'm talking about. And most of you know this already. But I'm not talking about sympathy. I'm not talking about being sad that this happened in the past, that the lynching occurred in the past. I'm so sad about it. I'm talking about the radical type of empathy that you need, where you can put yourself in the shoes, in the life of the people who were going through this at the time. When you can actually put yourself in their place, it gives you a whole different feeling. And often in practice, what we would do is sometimes we would have families and the wife is fussing with the husband is fussing with the wife. And sometimes we have to pull them back and say, okay, let's put each of you in the other person's shoes, to get you to get a good idea of exactly how they feel. And that gives you a good idea of why they do what they are doing. But one sad aspect of American life is the fact that we tend to shy away from empathy. And this brings us back to the point relative to our history. I want to give you a quote from someone in the past, a Jewish intellectual. This was a Jewish intellectual who left Germany during the atrocities that were occurring at the time of World War II. He came to America, and one of the first observations that he made when he got here was, quote, "The worst disease in America is the treatment of the Negro." He also goes on to say that being a Jew myself, perhaps I can understand and empathize with how the black people feel as a victim of discrimination. That well-known intellectual was Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein spoke on behalf of civil rights after he got here. He was so appalled by what he actually saw that he joined a committee with NAACP to end lynching. And now, while I'm on a roll, let me give you another quote. Martin Luther King stated, and many of you have heard this many times, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Now think about it. What would have happened if the vendor, that young man who was in the store at the time that the apples had been given out, what would have happened if he had just stopped for just a second, just a short period of time? Just think about it. How, if he had stopped and said, okay now, and this is where the empathy part comes in. How would I feel if my mother was in here and she had been given these apples, or my brother, or some other family member, just for a second? Right away, that person would have likely changed what he did. But he was on that bandwagon that I was talking about. He was on that bandwagon where he felt it's okay. It's okay to dehumanize these people. It's okay to give them rotten apples because my crowd's going to go along with it. We have to stop and look back at how we feel and how and the kinds of things that we do. And it only takes a few minutes, really a few seconds. And the wind blows. Now, I don't want you to boo me for what I'm getting ready to say now. But I could make an argument. I could make an argument that the young man who actually gave out these bad apples may not have been a bad person. He likely, simply, as I stated just now, he followed the crowd. He thought it was all right. Why? Because that's what he was taught. We perpetuate these things on a generational basis. He thought it was okay. And if he had been taught something different, he would have acted differently. So what I'm saying is, it doesn't have to be that way. We can use love, peace, and empathy, and it will change how we approach things. It will change how we look at things. You see, I don't really believe that people are inherently evil. I think that they are usually just simply misread. So, in closing, when you get home today, I would like for each person in here to take just a minute to step back and quietly reflect on what type of person you are. Where do you fit on the spectrum of human behavior? Ask yourself, could you have empathy for your fellow man? Could you have love for your fellow human being and bring harmony and peace? Or are you the type of person who is an agent of power, possession, desiring to put yourself in a position of superiority based on things that your bandwagon simply has promoted? Where a person is judged by the pigment in their skin, the size of their body, the slant of their eyes, things that you have erroneously felt made you feel better. Just stop and think. Because one thing is for sure, God is the ultimate designer. And guess what? He made every single person out here different. Every single person is different. And I don't think it's much of a leap to think that when God did this, he did it with the idea in mind that what we would do with that information is embrace rather than exploit. So again, remember, love, peace, and empathy. Thank you. Oh, one last thing. Happy Mother's Day.
Love, peace, and empathy. Love, peace, and empathy. Thank you, Dr. Coleman. Let's give him another hand. Thank you for that message. When you were speaking earlier in your keynote, and we're talking about how, let me do this again. We're talking about how families don't retell some of those stories, those tragic stories from our past. I couldn't help but think about my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who raised me. See, I'm a history teacher myself. I teach middle school social studies. But I also do research on my own on the side. And so I learned all of these things about Halifax County, where I'm from, where I grew up, that she never said anything to me about. I learned about lynchings in Halifax County. I learned about all these lawsuits that black people filed in Halifax County to fight against discrimination, employment discrimination. And, you know, when I got older, I got kind of upset because I was like, well, why didn't she tell me this stuff? You know? And then I thought about what you said, you know, people not wanting to pass on that trauma to the next generation. But what I will say is this, even if the elders don't choose to share that history with us, I think it's our responsibility to research and learn it for ourselves. And instead of thinking it's something that can actually hurt us, what that history did for me personally, I can only speak for myself, is that it empowered me. Right? Because I know from whence I came. I know the struggle. I know what my people endured. And I'd be wrong if I don't keep that fight and that struggle going. So thank you again for reminding me of my grandmother. I do want to say a few things before we move on. There are some things on these tables that are in this area that are on display that you can take with you when you leave. Books, calendars, monologues from the descendants, from Mr. Green, the jailer, who was mentioned earlier, as well as brochures. So please feel free to take those on your way out. We are going to have a little rearrangement in the order of service. I feel like I'm in church. Okay. That was a joke. Y'all were supposed to laugh. Mrs. Beth Wethington, the co-coordinator of the Warren County Community Remembrance Coalition, is going to come forward at this time and read one of the apology letters that will be read this afternoon. Then we will have more music from Mr. Green, as well as the soil collection and the filling of the jars by the descendants of these two families, as well as from some students who are in attendance. Those descendants will be Mrs. Jean Stevenson, Ms. Carolyn Cheek. The students will be Breonna Durham, Alex Whitaker. Please forgive me, y'all, if I mispronounce your names. Kai Hicks, Selena Lynn, and Nuri Smith. After all of that, Miss Angelina Kearney Dunlap will come forward to recognize the descendants. So, Mrs. Wethington. Thank you.
My first apology will be for asking Mary to rearrange the schedule a little bit. My mother has developed some health problems and I need to be there as soon as possible, and she's in Pennsylvania. But I don't pretend to think that words can make right the many wrongs that have been perpetrated and perpetuated upon Black people. But these words I offer. I thought it was an enlightened statement that would be received as such. Instead, heads turned toward me, angry expressions on the faces. "You disgust me," one woman spat. I didn't even know what I had said that was so offensive. Distraught, I turned to my husband. "Welcome to the South," he said. Clearly, I had a lot to learn. Ignorance is no excuse, nor even worse is the assumption that a white person has any understanding of what it's like to live as a person of color. I apologize for ever thinking that I had a clue, and for all of us who still don't think we do. And after listening to Dr. Coleman, I also apologize for not realizing the harm that we do, and that we keep doing it, and for refusing to learn from our mistakes and from the past. I grew up in the North and lived in areas with little enough diversity that it was easy to feel righteously free of prejudice. Truth be told, I didn't realize what it meant to be a white person until I lived in North Carolina. I may be able to claim my ancestors were not slaveholders. I may even be able to claim my ancestors were abolitionists, but I cannot claim that I do not benefit from living in a society that privileges my skin color, and for this I am complicit. Living in the South, in North Carolina, in Warren County, provides a first-hand education that when our forefathers bravely declared that all men were created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights, they didn't really mean all men, a fact revealed throughout the history of the nation, with little attempt to disguise the fact. The wretched institution of slavery, the battle over states' rights to maintain it, lynchings, disregard for family unity, denial of the right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. The Wilmington Massacre, the Tulsa Massacre, Jim Crow, separate but equal, redlining. I hate that our country, that considers itself a democratic republic, openly engaged in these sordid acts of discrimination and hatred, perpetuating myths of white superiority, white supremacy, and punishing those whites who sought and seek to achieve the American dream. Our country owes an apology to Black people, African Americans who still struggle to find equality as Americans, African or not. But of course things have changed, haven't they? Brown versus Board of Education, civil rights legislation, affirmative action, the election of Barack Obama to the presidency, changed everything. Or is that yet another myth we tell ourselves? An innocent lie we tell ourselves as business as usual marks our days, even though the Supreme Court thinks we no longer need the Voter Rights Act or affirmative action, and there are ways around civil rights legislation. Business as usual seems to work better for white people than it does for Black people. How is this right? How is this fair? I'm sorry, it is not the self-evident truth that speaks for itself. The truth is, we have not come as far as we would like to think we have. And that brings us to the present. There are people in our country, in our state, in our community, who question the need to learn from the past, to revisit the past. A lot of these people are actually very proud of our community's history, the fine historic buildings, the connections to famous people, the agriculture that once established Warrenton as a most important city between Raleigh and Richmond. Who was the Warren for whom county and town were named? Or Macon? Or Bragg Street? History is represented in the very cloth of the town and county, in surnames that continue to be honored today. But whose history? Those names are the names of white people, of course. The old guard of those who feel the past needs to be revisited regularly and celebrated, preserved as heritage, as proof of worth, wealth, and importance. I can't help but notice the last names of prestigious white people are often twinned with the last names of Black people. The reasons for this cannot be avoided, though they are not quite as celebrated. History walks our streets, and yet only part of that history is hallowed. Where are the stories that reflect the lives of the people who actually built the fine houses? What are their names? who worked the fields that brought wealth and notoriety to our county? Who was displaced when the lakes were created? Where are their stories? And what stories were told to convince them to sell prospective lakefront property at rock bottom price, if they were paid at all? Apologies are needed for these forgotten souls, the people without whom Warren County would not be. Apologies are needed to their families who received no benefit of inheritance from land on which they labored, for the contributions they made to this county, for the skill and craftsmanship, for the raising of other people's children. Who knows what their own were denied? In 1921, 2 black men were lynched in Warren County, not far from Warrenton city center. They were taken by an angry white mob from the local jail, right here, that had been essentially left unguarded. Their crime was seeking recompense for rotten apples substituted for those they had paid premium price for. Their crime was having the audacity to question the white boy who sold them the apples. Their crime was compounded when other members of their community stepped up to defend the rights to fair consideration when patronizing the local Norlina shop. A riot broke out, white against black. Those arrested were all black. Plummer Bullock and Alfred Williams were lynched. Say their names. Plummer Bullock. Alfred Williams. 16 others had their day in court, where all were found guilty, forced to serve time or leave town. No white people were detained. No white people were arrested for the killing of these 2 young men. In 2021 and 2022, a group came together to reenact the so-called trial of the 16 men, a demonstrative miscarriage of justice with the verdict predetermined by the color of skin. The reenactments, held in the Warren County Courthouse, were widely advertised, but attendance was not representative of county demographics. The sentiment of many citizens was one of questioning the purpose of this revisiting the past. But much of this past has never been visited in the first place. The history of our county is one-sided, and actions should and are being taken to rectify this omission. The collecting of soil in the honor of these men who were brutally taken and killed is one step toward acknowledging the wrongs that have been perpetuated on this soil, on this fertile Warren County ground. The establishment of the monuments mark this foul deed, but that needs to be accompanied by an apology from the leading voices of this community, and if they are absent, I will make it in their stead. People of color in Warren County have been treated unfairly from the time of its inception. That is wrong, and I offer an apology to all who have been harmed by cruel and thoughtless, by mean-spirited and deliberate, by ignorant and greedy people who feel or felt entitled to mistreat, harm, injure, destroy, disparage the person and being of the blacks in this community. And furthermore, I know that these actions are not relegated to the past, but live on in an unequal, inequitable, insidious behavior on the part of too many of our citizens. It is time to address, to name, to see that the history of white domination continues. It continues when children are denied the opportunities of their white peers. It continues when a black person is treated suspiciously or impolitely or just plain ignored when he or she enters a place of business. It continues when police officers are permitted to engage in excessive force and when requests for investigation or action are met with silence. It continues when we fear the teaching of a fuller history, when we refuse the examination of fair practices, when we insist we are not prejudiced without even knowing what that means. Human relationship is fraught in the best of circumstances. But when we allow a corrupt past to dictate our present, our future, when we allow a past we pretend to deny to inform our actions, when we justify our ignorance because we believe we are enlightened, we deceive ourselves and deprive ourselves of a greater humanity. I apologize for my own complicity in these behaviors. I apologize for silence that confers consent. And I ask apologies on behalf of those who know, those who don't know, those who don't care that racism thrives whether we see it or not. Until we have justice for all, we have justice for none. No one is free until all are free. Until we come together in the spirit of kinship and wanting the best for all, we have failed at the task of being human. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Weatherton. All right, we're going to proceed with the soil collection and filling of the jars. Would any of the descendants like to join the students?
On behalf of the Bullock and Williams family, I stand before you accepting your apology. I can only speak for myself, but I believe with my family and the way their hearts are, that they accept your apology too. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not going to prolong this long, but my cousin Jean and I do have a few things that we want to say. I will start out by saying, and we all know this quote, I know why the cage bird sings. But I add another sentence to that. I know why the cage bird, some of us sing and some of us don't sing. And it was a prime example through what was told. Yes, we stand here today because of total injustice that happened to our cousins in North Carolina. They had fair money, but they did not get a fair price. The story was passed down to me from my grandmother to my mother on that injustice of how they just looked at it by apples. And they gave the wrong. They were brave enough to go back in, and you'll see through our family members, we are brave enough to speak out. And but with that bravery, one thing my mother used to always tell me, because I owned a store on Main Street, Carolyn, if you don't learn how to shut your mouth, them white folks gonna lynch you. And we talking about this time, and she used to be so afraid for me because I wouldn't shut my mouth, and I refused to shut my mouth. I want you to look at me and my cousin today. You don't see any shackles on our hands, cuffs on our hands, and you don't see no shackles on our feet. I'm gonna ask you the question. Do not answer it until I finish. Do you believe I still have cuffs on me? Do you believe I still have shackles on me? Don't answer. The other thing is, when we go and we have injustice that cuffs us, when we can't go to different places, that puts shackles on our feet. So what are we going to do about this? Are we going to sit around and wait for our 40 acres and our mule? Is that what we're going to do? Or are we going to rise up, take the torch, remember Plummer and Matthew and
sure that they know our history. And we're delighted to have some students with us today who are filling the jars with soil. The soil that has the blood of our people, of our ancestors in it. It doesn't really matter where the blood specifically was taken from, because the county, the whole county, like many counties, has the blood of our people. We know there's healing in the blood. We know also that life comes from the soil. So these jars will be filled, and we will then place them, I believe, in the library here, and then later they will be in the Warren County Historical Museum. Okay. As we go forth, I do want to say thank you to the students. I want to encourage members of the family, ancestors who want to come and do a shovel. We invite you to do that. And I want to go one step further and say that out of those of you who have empathy, peace, healing in your hearts, regardless of your skin tone, feel free to come and also pour a shovel.
Good afternoon. My name is Tina Thomas. This is my first cousin, Tamara Leonard, and we are the great-great-granddaughters of Alfred Williams. And on behalf of our entire Williams family, we want to say thank you for this ceremony honoring Alfred Williams and Plummer Bullock, to the Justice Initiative in partnership with Warren County NAACP and the County Remembrance Coalition, along with Dr. Henson. We want to say thank you on behalf of the Williams family.
Thank you.
And as the family members continue to fill the jar, we want to introduce and recognize the descendants. First, we want to recognize the descendants of Alfred Williams. Would all the Alfred Williams descendants please come to this area? If you're able, please stand and give us a brief introduction, your name and where you're from. Very briefly, please. Alfred Williams.
My name is Tamara Leonard, and my grandmother is Earlene Rodwell. Alfred Williams was her grandfather.
My name is Tina Thomas. I'm from Richmond, Virginia. My family is here, of course, from here, the descendants of Alfred Williams. And we have the same grandmother.
My name is Michael Taylor from Bronx, New York. Alfred Williams was my great-great-grandfather. I'm here on behalf of my mother, Brenda Jenkins, and the Towns, the Jenkins family. She was born here in 1956. Unfortunately, she's no longer here. This would have been her time here, but she passed away in 2020. So as a representation of the family, I'm here amongst family.
Hi, I'm Misada Taylor. I'm Michael Taylor's daughter and the granddaughter of Brenda Jenkins. It's I never thought I'd be here. I'm very emotional right now.
My name is Shane Woods. Like just spoke, she's a direct descendant of Alfred Williams. This has really been a momentous experience for all of us, learning the history of Alfred Williams, having the children involved, because it starts with us to talk to them so they can pass it along. We see a lot of older ones here, but there are some young ones here. And without their voice to experience what happened to those two individuals, it would stop there, but they can pass it on. So we appreciate everyone's support. We appreciate the family and the love.
I'm Sandra Williams. I'm a descendant of Alfred Williams as well.
I'm Charles Coleman. It's my sister. That's my brother. Direct descendant of Alfred Williams.
I'm Maceo Freeman from Richmond, Virginia. And Alfred Williams was my great uncle, brother of my grandmother. And I'm so grateful to Dr. Henson, to the Equal Justice Initiative folks, all the NAACP, everything that you have done. It took a story that I heard as a kid, and now know that it's marked in history because it was real. And we appreciate all the effort and all of you who are here today to help us to continue to remember. And we do tell our children we are going into our 52nd year of our family reunion, the Williams family reunion, to honor our great-grandparents for what they did and how we end up being where we are today.
I am Arnett Coleman, and Alfred Williams was my uncle, and he is the brother of my great-grandmother, Mary.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, the descendants of Plummer Bullock, would you please come? Plummer Bullock's descendants. And as you come, even though you represent your family group, you represent the larger black community, because for every known lynching, there were many more that are unknown. And so we appreciate you sharing your family with us. And we've been to the museum in Montgomery, Alabama. We have seen the display. It's awesome. I highly recommend that each one of us go. And the NAACP committee is raising funds to make this a museum. And I'm going to put a plug in that they're also have their books here for $20, but this can be also used as a donation collection to help with the museum work. That's just me sharing. Okay,
I'm Virginia Roach. I'm representing myself, my sister. Yes, thank you, Jeff. There's more of us too, but we are distant cousins on my mother's side.
Well, I think I've talked enough, but I'm a distant cousin. Actually, in our lineage, I am third cousin to Plummer and Matthew Bullock.
In losing our history, we sometimes lose that lineage. We forget or we don't know quite how we fit. But the truth of the matter is, again, we all come from common blood. We're proud to be family.
anyone else? So we recognize both families. And again, thank you for sharing your family with us.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is indeed an honor to be able to participate in this moment, and I have the resolution from the Warren County Board of Commissioners that is absolutely fitting for this occasion. Formally apologize for any part an elected or appointed local official in Warren County played in the 1921 lynching of Plummer Bullock and Alfred Williams. Whereas the crime of lynching was widely known to occur across the United States from Reconstruction through the middle of the 20th century. Whereas lynching was a form of terrorism practiced predominantly against African Americans that devastated families and cut short thousands of lives. Whereas on the 18th day of January 1921, 19-year-old Plummer Bullock and 45-year-old Alfred Williams were unlawfully taken from the Warren County Jail in Warrenton and brutally lynched by a vicious mob of county residents on the basis of an unsubstantiated allegation. Whereas 100% of those involved in these lynchings were unpunished. Whereas without the benefit of any corroborating evidence and denial of their constitutional right to a fair trial and without being afforded an opportunity to present a defense, Plummer Bullock and Alfred Williams were executed by said mob for the alleged offense. Whereas through this willful neglect, failure and or refusal to investigate and punish perpetrators by those who were tasked with protecting and defending the Constitution of the United States, of the Constitution of North Carolina, even in death, Plummer Bullock and Alfred Williams were denied their basic rights. Whereas there is evidence from the Warren County Sheriff, the Warren County Coroner, and the Warren County Jailkeeper were complacent in the preparation of the murders by lynching of Plummer Bullock and Alfred Williams. Whereas, in contravention of their responsibility to abide by their oaths of office, as aforesaid,
The above-mentioned public servants failed in meeting the basic responsibility of their offices. And whereas the Board of Commissioners desires to publicly acknowledge these facts and offer a formal apology for the heinous acts aforementioned. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Warren County Board of Commissioners does hereby apologize on behalf of any appointed or elected local public official who participated in, witnessed, facilitated, censored, suppressed, or was in any way involved in the lynching of Plummer Bullock and Alfred Williams and the subsequent failure to persecute those involved to the fullest extent of the law. And let it be further resolved that the Warren County Board of Commissioners expresses to the families of the descendants our deepest sympathies and regret for the death of Plummer Bullock and Alfred Williams and the denial of their dignity and basic human rights. This was adopted the 6th day of May 2024 with myself, Jennifer Pierce, as chair of the Board of Commissioners signing, as well as Sheriff of Warren County, John Branch, if he would sign this resolution. And again, it is our absolute apology to those families.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you again.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You know, as I sat there and I looked around and I saw all the things that were going on, I just want to say that it is not by accident or incident that we are here today. Did you see that funeral procession marching to the grave? Oh, that was not coincidence either. And so we stand here, you see that sign in front there, the future home of the Warren County Historical Museum. We are standing here on a very special piece of property. Not only is it part of the Warrenton Historical Preservation Society, but it is also the future site of Warren County Historical Museum. And I am Dolores German, President of the Board of Directors. We thank you for your presence. We thank you for the history, and we look forward to bringing all of the history, the truth-telling, the love that I heard Dr. Coleman talking about, the empathy as we tell the truth about who we are, who we have been, but most important, who we want to be. And so we look forward to bringing all of that history together in this building that will be the future museum. You can look at it now and you may say, oh, it needs a lot of help. It is beyond repair. But I remember a people that people thought was beyond repair, but look at us now. And so this building, we plan to raise it up as we raise up the history of the people, of all the people of Warren County. We wish that you would be a part of it. We welcome your input, and I thank you.
Thank you. Very well done. Very well done. Thank you.
Thanks to everyone. I think that this has been a fantastic program, and for this I would like to give a hand. First, I'd like to thank the planners of this event, and it's difficult to identify who the planners are because this is something that has been ongoing for the past 6 years. and that's the journey that we have been on. It's a long process. We have gotten to this point now where we are, say, making the first stop to take a breath and to celebrate what we have accomplished. I have 3 presentations. Let me get those out of the way that I'd like to make for, and it's not that anyone did something where they did not qualify to get one of those awards or plaques, but I have 3 framed resolutions that I wanted to give out, and I would like to give one to Dr. Henson, Dr. Coleman, and another person who is not on the program, but who did a big job for us. During the presentation, you heard them talk about the play that we did, and the person who wrote that play, none other than our playwright, Thomas Park. So if the 3 of you could come up, I have a resolution for you. Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to thank them because they did quite a lot for this whole project that we have undertaken. Dr. Henson from UNC, professor at UNC, did quite a lot of the research that we use for our talking points and for writing the play. Most of you all have seen the play. I like to mention that the play is videotaped and it's been edited, and it would be released soon. I don't have an exact date, I'll just say soon. Thank you. Thank you. There are quite a few other people that I just want to mention because they have done quite a lot. I want to mention Ms. Jerian King. She has always been there for us. We have and the community remembrance team, if they would please stand up to be recognized. Reverend Somerville, Dr. German, Ms. Broach, Brother Durham, Ms. Dunlap, and I may not see everybody, but they are the people who did the heavy lifting. I'd like to thank the descendants for permitting us to travel on this journey with you. Special thanks to Brother Green for doing libation and playing drums and getting permission from our ancestors so we can move along. I'd like to thank the commissioners and the sheriff, Ms. Pierce and Sheriff Branch, for the resolution. And we do thank you for that apology. I do have some copies of the resolution for other family members, and if I have extra, other people can also get some. I would like to thank Dr. Wethington, who would do the closing prayer for us. And of course, if I forgot to mention anybody individually, kindly excuse me and understand that your contribution was truly appreciated. I know that we have had a long time here and folks are getting tired, so I won't be, I'm always cautious not to be long-winded, but I had some other remarks to make. I want to remind everyone that we do have an exhibit at the outside fence where essentially you could get the history of everything that has been said. Use your cell phone to take a picture of all the different posters that we have there, and you'd have all that information with you. And of course, there are handouts on the table and refreshments there for you. Let me end. Today, as we conclude this solemn soil ceremony, we carry with us the weight of history and the responsibility to remember. The soil we collected is more than mere earth. It is a vessel of memory, pain, resilience, and courage. As stated on the program, there is healing in the soil. But today, as we collect this soil, we also collect hope. We collect the hope that the sacrifice was not in vain, that the memory will inspire us to dismantle the systems of oppression that allowed such horror to occur. Let us carry this soil with reverence, knowing that it connects us to a legacy of struggle and courage. Let us honor the memory by committing ourselves to justice, equality, and compassion. As we disperse from this place, let us take with us the resolve to be agents of change. Let us speak out against racism and advocate for the marginalized, and work tirelessly to create a world where no one suffers the same fate as Alfred Williams and Plummer Bullock. May their souls rest in peace, and may their memory fuel our collective journey towards a better tomorrow. Thank you.
The theme of this soil collection ceremony is there is healing in the soul. As we prepare to close out this program with gratitude for all of those who have led it and put it together, all of you who have come to be a part of this, we not only recognize that there is healing in the soul, but also that there is need for healing in the human soul. Let us pray. Oh, gracious God, in your holy scriptures, we read that you create human beings out of soil, that the ground is gathered up and shaped in your image, and into it is breathed your life. We also know that these bodies return to the ground. And as we've gathered today, this holy ground, we also recognize that mingled with this soil is the lifeblood of James Alfred Williams and Plummer Bullock, and others that we are increasingly aware of, whose names are not before us today, but whose memories we also hold dear, and whose lives will likewise, we pray, be lifted up in time to come. For we recognize that there is more lifeblood in this soil than these two alone. These who have suffered from human racial hatred and violence. And we pray that what we have done here today, that this soil might be consecrated as holy ground, And we pray that it might be an inspiration to each and every one of us, that we might be your instruments of reconciliation and healing in this community and beyond. We are sadly aware that there are those who should be joined with us today who are absent. We pray for their souls, and we pray that they might in time to come, some who may be descendants of those who were part of the white mob, that they too might join with us in the witness and actions of this community toward your reconciliation and healing, that there may indeed be justice for all in time to come. Dismiss us now with your peace as we remember these who we have brought before one another today in the collection of this soil, and others that also need to be remembered. And may we go forth emboldened and encouraged and committed to be your instruments of justice in this place. In your blessed name we pray. Amen.
May I have your attention for one moment? There's a booklet that's being passed around to get the name and addresses of descendants that are present today. We need you to keep it. I need to be able to make contact with you. If you send me an email, make sure all commas, all dots are in the right place.